Hi, everyone. Welcome to another one of our live video chats here. Thank you for joining us again. Today, we're going to be talking all things PPP. I am joined by the Chamber's own Justin Groenert and Stuart McCallum with HHM CPAs to talk about the PPP, updates to it, and what you can do to protect yourself from a possible future audit. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Excellent. All right, Stuart, why don't we start with you? Can you walk us through what to expect and how companies can protect themselves?
Certainly. My name is Stuart McCallum. I'm a partner with HHM. I'd like to thank each of you for taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar this afternoon. So firstly, this webinar and the related materials are do not constitute legal or professional advice. We're not the SBA, we're not the Treasury. What we're giving you is our interpretation and our understanding of the law's guidance and rules as they stand today. So the official guidance we're going to go over here and lay out a timeline of what we've been looking at. So the original law way back in March was that an eligible recipient or an eligible applicant for a covered loan had to make a good faith certification. And it said that uncertainty of the current economic environment made necessary the loan request to support ongoing operations of the recipient. So the original certification that each of you clicked on your application was just that due to economic uncertainty, I need the loan to keep going. So then we got subsequent guidance, and I just want to point out the timeline here, how much time passes. And I know that a lot of you have been frustrated trying to figure out the program and asking advisors, but frankly, there's just been a trickle of information over time. But so the next piece of guidance we got was almost a month later on April 23rd. And it said, do businesses owned by large companies with adequate sources of liquidity to support the business's ongoing operations qualify under that economic uncertainty? And so the Treasury issued their frequently asked questions. This said, borrowers must make this certification in good faith, taking into account their current business activity and their ability to access other sources of liquidity sufficient to support their ongoing operation. If you remember, and it's even still in the news, a lot of businesses applied and subsequently qualified for this program that I think they just did not expect to either get approved or they did not think that these companies would apply. One was AutoNation. They had applied, I think they got 77 million. I think Shake Shack got 10 million. Veritas, which is a large real estate management company in San Francisco, I think got multiple millions. And so there was immediately blowback on the program, right? Because what was seen as a savior to potential unemployed applicants now turned into what was in the court of public opinion corporate giveaway. So we had a public comment. So it's funny, guidance takes a month, but unofficial feedback from the government is swift, right? So Steve Mnuchin gave a White House press conference, and it said that borrowers will have criminal liability if their certification of financial need was not accurate. And he went a step further to say that they were going to do a full audit of every loan more than $2 million. Now, we've since got updated guidance, and I believe this was yesterday, and again, in the frequently asked questions. So what is this, 20 days after Steve Mnuchin's comments, 15 days after, it said, how will the SBA review borrowers require good faith certification? And so they really defined it as whether you have 2 million in loans or greater or lower than 2 million. and it is a total loan package across your affiliates. So, for example, here are some affiliate rules that we can recap. But first of all, here you'll see any affiliate businesses listed on your PPP application. So if on your application you listed that you had Company B and Company A, and both of those companies that you own entirely, both of those wholly owned companies each got loans for $1.5 million, you now are above that $2 million cap, and you will be subject to an audit of your need requirement. So to go back over this, this says any borrower that together with its affiliates received PPP loans with an original principal amount of less than $2 million will be deemed to have made a required certification in good faith. So if you've made, or if you have received loan proceeds in total from the PPP program less than $2 million, there is going to be what seems like an automatic assumption that you are operating and that you made your certification on your application in good faith. If you are over $2 million, then the SBA and the Treasury Department has reserved the right to do a complete audit before issuing forgiveness. And we're going to get into a lot of these if you have questions. Yep.
So, sorry to interrupt. I don't think we can see your screen.
When we entered,
there we go.
When we had people enter the lobby, it didn't. So we'll go back. Disclaimer language, but just to recap this quickly, the original law was economic uncertainty. Fast forward nearly a month, and because these companies that were getting money that the government did not want to get the money, or did not like the public image of getting the money, they passed this that said that you had to have this liquidity requirement. Fast forward beyond that, now we're talking criminal liability and full audits. And now, as of yesterday, we had this, which talks about that certification of good faith. And so if you have loans totaling less than $2 million, I'm not going to say you're in the clear with respect to forgiveness and all those items. However, with respect to certifying or proving that you financially needed this loan, they're just going to assume that you made that in good faith. So what does all this mean with these updated guidance? So loans under $2 million, there will not be an audit of your need certification, but it's not a guarantee of forgiveness. And it's not even that you get a free pass on forgiveness. You will still need to document as much as you can for your financial institution to approve forgiveness. For loans over $2 million, we need to document economic uncertainty. We need to document potential illiquidity in your business, access to capital, and covered expenses. So if you have loans totaling over $2 million from the PPP program, we have some homework to do. And so today's webinar will be talking about how to build up a defense for your eventual PPP audit. And so this is a slide that we put together to illustrate that in all of this coronavirus, here in Chattanooga, we had tornadoes. There's just so much noise, right? But what we need to do is find the data, the relevant data in that noise to help us with our defense. And so there are key facts to remember. And this is regardless of the size of your business. This is regardless of the industry, the segment, and how your business has been impacted. The certification that you made was as of the date of application. The requirement was that due to economic uncertainty. That economic uncertainty is the date of application. the additional guidance, which is really, I think, just a clarification of guidance on financial need as of the date of application. Access to capital as of the date of application. That is the certification that you entered into on your application was, are you currently? This guidance that is coming out that is talking about current requirements, what they mean is a clarification of the original law and in the original certification. So it is my understanding that they are not asking whether today you have economic uncertainty or access to capital. What they were doing, or what they're doing now, is asking as of the time of your application. They're just verifying that you had a definite and supportable, substantiated economic need for your loan. And so economic uncertainty can mean a lot of things, right? But keeping this in mind, that it's only as the date of application, it makes things a little bit easier. So let's talk about the economic uncertainty portion of this. So when you think of economic indicators, there's really two types. There's leading economic indicators, which would be equity markets, bond yields, consumer sentiment, foreign exchange. These are leading indicators because equity markets, bond yields, consumer sentiment, and foreign exchange is really forward-looking, right? You are buying a stock in a company today in the S&P 500 because of what that company is going to earn next year. Whereas lagging indicators, which would be like unemployment claims, consumer price index, or even GDP, those aren't measured real time. In fact, when we get unemployment claims, especially continuing unemployment claims, there's a significant amount of time that passes. GDP, you don't know for a quarter. Consumer price index, again, you're looking at historical transactions to get there. So when we are looking at putting together a defense of your PPP application, we really want to focus mostly on leading indicators. And they should be, again, as of the date of your application. So let's look at this. The S&P 500 represents medium and small businesses in this country. We've mapped it out here over the last, 7 months or so. And then we've indicated here where the law was signed and when the applications opened. And so you can see when the law was signed, there was a spike in the value of the S&P to the point where applications open. And now that area to the right there of where applications open shouldn't matter to you, right? Because that's after your date of application. That lift that you see there is because the economy got a little bit optimistic, right? This was when the PPP came out, and there were certain assumptions that this would all be forgiven and the government would bail us out. That's not necessarily improvement of economic conditions. But I do want to point this out. If you look at where the top of that market is to where applications open, where if you applied in the first round, you're more or less on that line on the right there where applications open, you're looking at a substantial decline in the S&P 500. That's probably 20-ish%, 25%. So from an economic standpoint, if you filled out your application on that first day or that first weekend, the fact pattern in terms of economic uncertainty that you're dealing with is that over the course of a month, the stock market lost trillions of dollars of value. And this is important, and we'll throw up the Russell 2000 here as well, which is also another medium and small business indicator. This one did not see the same resurgence. But again, these are barometers of forward-looking expectations in the economy. You buy the Russell 2000 index, you're buying the future earnings potential of the companies in this index. And so again, if we are on the date of application, if you remember, the world was falling apart, you need to make sure that you go back and document some of these things. Maybe the Russell 2000 doesn't apply to you. Maybe the S&P 500, those companies don't apply to you. Maybe it's another index. Maybe it's the NASDAQ. Maybe it's the Dow. Whatever it may be, this is one of those indicators that we would recommend go ahead, pull the data, and start to craft that narrative of what the situation was for you specifically on the date of your application. Because again, here, the Russell 2000 went from 1700, and then the date of application looks like it's right around 1150. That is a substantial decline. That's probably 40%, 35%. So when you're under an audit and they say, well, can you prove economic uncertainty? This is a really good indicator of it. Initial weekly unemployment claims. You can see here on the left when it was signed into law, look at all those very consistent unemployment claims all the way to when it was signed into law. And that's when the momentum of the economy really started to be impacted by coronavirus. And so you look at when applications opened, again, talking purely economic uncertainty, look at the amount of unemployed claims there immediately preceding, presumably, your application date. Again, this should be something that you're documenting. And I don't mean making a mental note of it. I mean, you're going to Yahoo Finance and you're pulling these schedules and you're going to put together a memo or a stack of documents with notes or whatever you want on there, where if you do come under an audit, you can just pull out this stack of information and you don't have to scratch your head and try to remember what your feelings were, right? If you try to remember today what you were thinking when you filled out your application, it's already a little bit foggy, right? We are 2 months later, a month later, a significant amount of time has passed. And so a key suggestion of this webinar is when we're going over some of these things that we're suggesting you document it today while it's still fresh in your mind, while you still have the same corporate controller, while you still have the same accounting staff, you have the same general manager, whatever, you just have to assume that whatever could go wrong in between now and when you apply for forgiveness could go wrong in terms of documentation. Stock up as much as possible on the information that is readily available and also top of mind. My last comment on this is that if you wait until you're under audit to try to pull some of this information together, Google will be absolutely flooded with coronavirus articles, what suppliers you had that shut down, whatever the case may be. It will be harder as time goes on to produce some of these documents. But so here, again, initial weekly unemployment claims, pretty impactful indicator for the overall economy. The shelter-in-place orders. Now, again, it says at the date of application, they had a significant impact on the economic activity of the United States, obviously. Many businesses closed entirely. At the time that shelter-in-place orders were initiated, some of them had end dates and some did not. There was also some uncertainty as to what businesses could stay open and which could close. So again, this adds to that economic uncertainty. So what we recommend is pull together documentation of your shelter-in-place orders wherever you are. So here, for local businesses, I've gone ahead and grabbed Tennessee and Georgia for you. So Tennessee was initiated March 31st, and it was originally slated to end April 14th. Georgia, which many of us do business in, started on April 2nd and was supposed to originally go through April 30th. To illustrate the uncertainty, right? So here, if there are any national businesses here on this webinar, that is, maybe you sell widgets or carpet or whatever all over the country, places like New York, they're going to be closed for multiple months. California started on March 19th. I read that Los Angeles is going to be closed until July. Some people are even thinking August. So just because your local business shelter-in-place order has already passed doesn't mean that your business is out of the woods. Because if I produce carpet down in Dalton and I ship half my shipments to California, then for all intents and purposes, half my business is still closed. So be sure that when you are going through the documentation of this, that you are intentional in thinking about how all of these items could impact you. And so here's the question: what is your relevant shelter-in-place order? So if your business might be reliant on out-of-state travelers, right? So let's go back to Los Angeles here through July. Well, if you're a restaurant, a hotel, a rental car agency, a theme park, an RV park, an aquarium, a zoo, or any wholesalers to the above, the lack of people in Los Angeles and their ability to come here and go on vacation impacts your business to the extent that Florida makes up a significant portion of your rental lodging business up in Gatlinburg. To the extent that they're closed, has a material impact on your business. So when we're talking about documenting shelter-in-place orders, make sure that you are considering not only your physical location, but in fact, the locations of everywhere that you do a material amount of business. So now all of a sudden, like I said, when we were talking, there's so much noise in the data, but when you start digging in and making that list of how your business has been impacted, the path of putting together that documentation becomes relatively clear, or more so clear as you're going down the list. So, and I'm going to reemphasize this again, and I'll reemphasize it probably at the end. You should document everything that's relevant, and you should document it today. What you don't want to have happen is that you attend this webinar, you say, oh, this is great information, there's so much information, but I'm going to do it when I come under audit. You might not have the same controller, you might not have the same CFO, the economy might completely turn around and you will have forgotten all the stress that you had during this time. Even worse, you may come under audit and for whatever reason this gets dragged out years in the courts. By the time you wind up in court over your PPP loan forgiveness, again, what are the odds that you remember all of this? What are the odds that you have the same controller, accounting staff, CFO, plant manager, whatever? I cannot stress enough that the best time to have documented this stuff was last month. The next best time is today. So there's that economic uncertainty piece, right? And then, as we talked about earlier, there's this revised guidance, maybe some clarity guidance that talks about financial need and access to capital. And so let's break down, when they say financial need, let's talk about some of these items. And in particular, we're going to talk about the availability of on-hand capital, that is cash that's in your bank account. What do you do if you have $3 million sitting in your checking account? Availability of outside capital, so banks, the possibility of outside capital. So this is a little bit, again, different nuance that's worth documenting and considering, and then the cost of that capital. So availability of on-hand capital. So let's just say I am a car dealership, right? And I have $3 million of cash sitting on my bank account. It's on my corporate balance sheet. It might seem like I do not have a financial need, right? So you think you're dead on arrival, there's no way you're going to survive the audit. But let's think about it. We have a balancing act between our cash and liabilities. And we'll go through the second bullet point to illustrate this. So if I am a manufacturer, or if I'm an accounting firm, for that matter, and half my customers go out of business, all of the accounts receivable I have on my books might just be bad debt now. There's no way I'm going to collect it. I could be a food distributor, and it's not that my customers or restaurants have gone out of business. They've just been closed. And because they're closed, and because the PPP doesn't allow for inventory reimbursement, they're not paying me. So me as a food wholesaler, I'm going to have to support my business, assuming that some portion of my accounts receivable is going to be written off. So now all of a sudden, that $2 million of cash, or even $500,000 of cash, is not cash I can use. That's cash that I have to maintain to operate my business. The third bullet point there, investments. Assume that I have a roof that needs to be replaced. Assume that I am a franchisee and the franchise or the manufacturer has come to me and said that I need to change the signage out front or else they're going to take my franchise away. Again, if I have $500,000 of cash on my checking account, but I need to install a sign or install different tile or put a new facade on the building, that's real money. So that cash is already earmarked for something else. Along the same lines, obsolete inventory. So you might have a bunch of inventory on your balance sheet, but it might be old. If you're a metal stamper, maybe it's rusted, maybe it's just garbage. There is no cash flow that you're going to be able to realize behind that inventory. So again, in order to maintain your cash cycle in the operation of your business, you can't rely on inventory. And what's more, that obsolete inventory might even have a revolver or revolving line of credit behind it. And so you need that cash to make whole that revolver because that inventory is not going to cover the actual cost that you have on your revolver. So as I mentioned, you could have a significant amount of cash on hand, but that doesn't mean that it's available for you to use for the purposes that are covered by this program. Availability of outside capital. There's been a lot of talk in the media about how certain segments of society are not actively banked. They did not have a banking relationship that was established, and therefore they had difficulty getting a PPP loan. How is that any different than if you didn't get a PPP loan and you were trying to get a regular loan from a bank, a regular working capital loan from a bank? So here, you really should list out what was the fact pattern of your business, again, at the time of application, with respect to your ability to get outside funds. We had I talked to somebody that actually had a large bank walk away from a refinancing that they had lined up. This is several weeks back. I've talked to a couple of others around the country that have had similar actions. To the extent that you had a revolver or a loan pulled back by your bank, go ahead and print that out and stick it in your pocket for when you come under audit. I'm going to talk about the fourth bullet point here, and I don't know what your interactions were with your bankers, but how busy was your banker between April 2nd and April 17th? You probably couldn't even get them on the phone. In fact, I have a good friend of mine that works for a large national bank that sent out an email to all his contacts that said that he was on the PPP review committee and he would not be able to answer phone calls or emails for at least 2 weeks. Don't call him, don't email him, don't bother. Well, so if I'm a business looking for outside capital, how am I supposed to get a bank loan if the bankers won't even call me back because they're swamped doing PPP loans? So to the extent that you reached out to a bank or just got an unsolicited email from your banker saying, hey, I'm going to be swamped, again, keep that documentation. And then the last bullet point is timing. You may have had outside capital available to you, but what does that timing look like? If I'm a large restaurant group and I want to issue bonds, or I want to go through a bank to get a bank loan, there's weeks, if not months of underwriting. Well, when you have a flash recession like we did, you can't wait months for funding. And so in your documentation, and we'll go into this a little bit later in a few slides, but it's worth putting together a financial package that shows when you needed the funds relative to the timing of all this. Because it is possible that you could not wait 2 or 3 months for your bank to underwrite a typical loan and still stay in operation and maintain employment, which was ultimately the purpose of this program. So if you remember, I said availability of outside capital, but this next one's important. It is possibility of outside capital. So Sure, you may have been able to get a loan theoretically from your bank, but do you already have existing loan covenants that would prevent you from taking on additional debt? Would taking on additional debt push you significantly outside of your typical industry debt ratios? That is, if, for example, car dealerships, you have generally half or less of your goodwill under a loan or collateral for a loan. If you had to take on additional debt, would that push you above that ratio of total assets, which would also presumably trip a loan covenant? And then lastly, profitability. Most loans, when they're approved, are based upon a ratio of how much money you're making, or EBITDA, and how big the loan is. A lot of times loans from traditional banks do not exceed or cannot exceed 3 or 4 times the EBITDA. So if I make $1 million, the bank will give me up to a $4 million loan. This is talking in very broad strokes, but the logic here will hold. During this time, especially in shelter-in-place orders, what was your profitability? So you may have made $1 million last year, but in February, March, April, you came to a screeching halt. So when you applied for that loan, you may have lost a significant amount of money. Is a bank willing to lend you money when your revenue and profitability is going like this? Again, documentation. I'm not saying that you needed to have applied for a loan and gotten rejected, but every piece of evidence that you can put together that would indicate that it was not possible for you to take on additional loan, especially these existing loan covenants. This should be extremely helpful in preparing for your defense. The cost of outside capital. So the frequently asked question said that your availability of capital cannot be significantly detrimental to the business. Otherwise, you should go with the PPP loan. So here, I just want to emphasize, money's always available, right? If I wanted to go to Vegas right now, if they were open, and bet $1 million on whatever, roulette, there is some guy somewhere in Vegas that would give me that $1 million. What it would cost is a significant amount, but you can always get capital. What you need to underline here, though, is that significantly detrimental. And this also goes back to this. I might be able to get outside capital, but is it going to trip a loan covenant? Is it going to put my debt ratios so high that I can't survive afterward? And so that last bullet point is, would your business survive the addition of debt or excessive debt? And so to document all of this, again, document now. The best time to document this was last month. The next best time is today. And document as much possible that is relevant to your business and your personal situation. And here, and there are I would recommend maybe talking to your financial advisors. If you're an HHM client, reach out to us. Reach out to your financial advisors or your trusted advisors and ask them to help you run a stress test. And that is, how much cash runway do I have, or did I have as of the date of my application? So if revenue is going to come to be $0, but I still have all these expenses, can I go a month? Can I go 2 months? How much debt would I need to extend my runway, that is my cash burn rate, to a point that I thought the economy was going to become normal? And even though this was an 8-week program, I don't think many people thought that everything was going to be back to normal in 8 weeks. And so when you're doing this stress test analysis, you should be aware that your runway and your forecast should be longer than that 8 weeks. Right now we're talking to some manufacturers where all up and down their supply chain, their suppliers are just now turning on. And so if I'm a manufacturer today, I might not have all of the inputs I need to start production again for weeks, maybe months. Volkswagen here in town gets their engines or their powertrains built in Mexico. I think Mexico just today or yesterday turned on those factories again. So how long does it take to make a motor in Mexico and get it to Chattanooga, Tennessee? That again could be weeks. So when you're doing these stress tests, just don't look at the balance sheet as of your date of application. Also think about what were your expectations for cash use as of this date. If you did take on that debt, would you ever turn a profit again? Or goes back to this, is my debt ratio so high that now I'm a zombie company? I exist only to pay debt. And that fourth bullet point under that stress test, I think, is a key one. The purpose of this program was to save jobs. So if I'm doing a stress test and I'm talking about my ability to keep the doors open, you should emphasize how many jobs you would need to cut to get to a point where your business could become stable again. Because I think at that point, I don't want to say it becomes self-evident why you applied for the PPP loan, but if I'm a large restaurant group and the choice is between take on debt and crush my company, take the PPP loan and keep, 200 jobs or 300 jobs, I think whoever's reviewing your application is going to look at the job saved and realize that based upon all these other fact patterns, right? Lack of cash that's earmarked for other things, a complete unavailability of other capital, plus we saved all these jobs. Now all of a sudden your application is looking convincing, isn't it? And then again, everything's as of the date of application. So if you applied on April 6th, how much cash did you have? What were your expectations regarding future profitability? And it's going to be hard to forecast, right? But remember, date of application. So what if? What if the audit that they perform is successful? So the SBA gave us some guidance. And it says that if the SBA determines during the review that you do not have a need for the loan, then they're going to ask you to give it back. If you pay back the loan, they will not pursue any enforcement or criminal charges against you. The question that is going to be asked, I guarantee it, is, well, how long do we have to give back the money when they say that we did qualify under this program? There's no guidance. I think if you asked 100 accountants and 100 attorneys, they'd all have different ideas. But according to my understanding at this time, there is no clarification on that. Is it you have a week? Is it that you have 2 months? Do you have the 2 years? They're just going to convert it to a loan and none of it's forgivable? That I don't know, and I don't think anybody has the answer at this time. But just to recap, if you do all this defense preparation, and at the end of the day, they still determine that your audit, in their audit, that your financial need did not justify or did not comply with the purposes of the PPP loan program, they're just going to ask you for the money back at the beginning. They may seek criminal charges or administrative enforcement down the line, but what we know now is that there is kind of this safe harbor, if you will, where they're going to ask you to repay it and they will take the money back after you apply for forgiveness. And so some final thoughts here. There's a plethora of economic evidence in our favor, that is in defense of your loan application. If you just looked at the economic side of it, that economic uncertainty, there's a lot in your favor. What you need to determine is how much information is available that is not in your favor. Keep good records. And then this last bullet point here, don't be the first forgiveness application. So we presume that a lot of people are going to apply for forgiveness as soon as they can, which will presumably be June 30th or July 1st. Don't be the first one to submit your application for forgiveness. And I'll tell you why. So in the CARES Act, there is in the original law, and I haven't seen updated guidance on this, so it's my understanding that that still holds. Banks only have 60 days to either approve or deny your forgiveness. That's it. And so if you apply on June 30th, they're going to have 2 months to look at that application. And the bank's going to look at all of the payroll information you're submitting, all the rent, canceled checks, utility, rental agreements, everybody that you hired, everybody that you terminated or laid off, people that you brought back, what their compensation was, all their pay stubs. And then they're going to submit, presumably, some financial information to the SBA or the Treasury that then is going to do their own or review or audit of your need that we've discussed. That's a lot to accomplish in 60 days. It's not a lot to accomplish in 60 days if you are the very first forgiveness application, and that's the one that they start with, right? But as we saw with the loan application process, if you got your loan, if you were the first loan in there, you were the first loan processed, maybe you got your money 3 or 4 days later. If you didn't wait, if you waited until the next day to apply for the loan, you may have waited 20 days just to find out that they even processed your loan. There was a significant backlog because of the necessary work that needs to be done in this program. There's a lot of mechanics and logistics behind it. And so this bullet point here says that if you submit your loan, let's say a week or 2 in, they may already have a backlog of forgiveness applications that they're trying to review. And so knowing that they only have that 60-day window to review it, and you wait till they already have a backlog, it is possible that you may come out ahead or have favorable review or audit procedures done on your application because they probably won't get to it right away. So just to reemphasize, I would not want to be the first forgiveness application. I would rather be like the 1,000th. And Jeremy, I don't know if we have questions.
We do. First, I think we want to bring Justin in really quick to give us a quick update on some of the changes that have happened recently, and then we'll open it up to Q&A if that's okay with both of you.
Sure. Stuart, great job. That was really awesome, and you took most of my notes, so well done. The one thing I would add, and I think there was a question about this in here as well, is the question of bringing back employees that might have gotten furloughed. One of the frequently asked question guidance that came out yesterday said that as long as you offered that employee a job, their job back at their pay before they were furloughed or let go in writing, that would not count against you in terms of the forgiveness of the loan. So that we think is a very good move, especially with the struggles that we've been hearing businesses are having, bringing folks back with the additional unemployment benefit. So that is one thing that I think is very important for everyone to know as they're looking at how do we get the number of employees that we had brought back up to speed. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Obviously, Congress is in the beginning throes of a phase 4 package, 4.5. They've changed the number so many times now. The partisan getting along that we've seen in Washington up to this point, I think seems to be slowing down significantly. The House submitted a 1,815-page bill titled the HEROES Act that would cost roughly about $3 trillion, which is about what we've spent thus far in the other packages. And it is what we like to call a marker bill. It does not have bipartisan support. It's kind of the Christmas tree of policies that the Democrats would like to have on the table for discussion with the Senate. Speaker Pelosi has indicated they could vote on the HEROES Act as soon as tomorrow, Friday, or early next week. We will see. The Senate Republicans, Senator McConnell has called that bill dead on arrival to the Senate. His focus is much less on additional spending, more on liability reform and some other things as it pertains to the virus. The U.S. Chamber is working closely with our elected officials in D.C. They are looking for timely, targeted, and temporary solutions to prevent frivolous lawsuits and some other things that we think will be very important for our member businesses. So the gamesmanship, I think, is going to start up relatively soon. So the timeline as of now appears that at the earliest the House would vote this week. We might see a Senate bill start their process sometime next week, and then that would again sort of frame the negotiations with Secretary Mnuchin and the White House as they sort of come together on an additional package. So that's kind of where we sit in Washington, and we are following it quite heavily. I will tell you, it's been a lot of I'm not even quite done with the House. Democrats released a breakdown of the 800 or 1,800 pages, and the breakdown came in at 90 pages. So there is a whole lot to sort of parse through in the House Democratic bill, and we are sort of working our way through those to sort of get an idea of where the Democrats would like to go, and then obviously what the counter measure will be on the Senate side. So you'll hear plenty more to come as these things sort of start to move.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Let's go through some questions. We've had a few come in. If you guys have questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A, and we'll get through as many of these as we reasonably can here.
Jeremy, I do have a clarifying point.
Sure.
We've been asked many times. So let's just say I have a $2 million loan. If I return the $50, does that put me below the audit threshold? We don't know. I had a friend reach out to their banker that asked him something very similar. Hey, I want to make sure that I'm in compliance. What do I do? And I told my friend, I'm like, listen, make sure you get it in an email. Make sure that he doesn't call you. Just make sure it's in text. And sure enough, the banker emailed him back and said, we don't know. Spend it in good faith. Document everything, and when we know, you'll know.
Okay, that cues up one question I've seen on here already. For people that fall into that safe harbor below the 2 million point, do they need to be documenting this stuff as recently companies that are above it?
So they'll need to document their covered expenses, payroll, mortgage interest, rent, utilities. They will not necessarily need to document the items covered in this webinar, as if they fall under that $2 million amount, presumably based upon the most recent guidance, which is question 46 on the FAQs we've gone over, there is then a presumption that they've made that certification in good faith. So they still need to document for things for forgiveness.
Sure.
But the certifications, there's just going to be a presumption that they did so in good faith.
How should entities record the loans on their records and the later subsequent forgiveness?
We have been recommending that the accounting be relatively concise. That is, that it is easy to track. We have also been recommending that our clients only recognize forgiveness when they actually know they're getting it. I know some companies like to have their financials be as accurate and reflective of true economics as possible. And so they're saying, oh, well, I'm going to spend $1 million on payroll this month. I have a very strong likelihood of getting it forgiven. Therefore, I should have some offsetting entry. There's a couple of reasons why I'd advise against that. One, I would not want to take forgiveness too early because, one, you're not guaranteed forgiveness, right? There's still a chance that something could go wrong. And two, if there really is a financial need for this program, I don't think you get any award for making your books look better than they actually are.
Okay.
I would also, with respect to the books, I would probably have an account set up with these funds that when you make payroll, you take that amount of money, move it over to payroll, and in that way, there is a very clear chain of evidence, right? So if you're going to be forgiven for payroll, I have the money here, I move this money over, I issue a check out of this account. Here's the payroll run. This payroll run matches up with the money that I took out of the loan account.
Okay. I think there's a bit of confusion on the 60 days that I'm seeing here. The 60 days is for the banks to process forgiveness. You don't have to spend the money within 60 days of receiving it.
No, so you have 8 weeks to spend the money after you receive it.
Okay.
And then, and Justin, you may have a better idea of this than I. I think you either have 30 or 90 days after the end of the program to actually submit your forgiveness application. Admittedly, I haven't looked into this too deep because I just assumed that all of my clients would try to run through the door at the same time, which is July 1st.
Right. I'm not 100% sure on the 3-month, 9-month on the back end. I do know that the 8 weeks starts the day that your bank, originated the loan. So
Yep.
That is when your 8-week clock starts. Again, you have to make up for payroll, your entire payroll, which is basically, there are a couple different formulas, but the main one was what was your average monthly payroll, including benefits and all of that sort of thing. So you have to cover 8 weeks of that and show that you have either kept on or attempted to bring back the same essential payroll. It's not individual people, but you have to keep the payroll roughly the same for that 8-week period based on what your business had done historically.
Okay. I think that answers some of the questions I'm seeing here. There are a lot of questions about employees and rehiring. If employees leave during that period, do you have to hire replacements before that period is over with for it to count? I'm seeing a lot of that in here as well.
So the questions related to employees are complicated enough that I think we've done 2 or 3 other whole webinars on.
Okay.
So I will give the high level here. And that is, there's a kind of a safe harbor in the CARES Act that said that if as of June 30th, your full-time equivalent count was the same as February 15th of this year, then there would not be limitations or reductions on your forgiveness amount. Whereas, let's just say I had 100 FTEs and a full-time equivalent is defined as 30 hours or more. So an employee that works 60 hours is not 2 FTEs, it's still only 1. But if you had 100 FTEs on February 15th and you had 50 FTEs, so half as many on June 30th, you will have some explaining to do. And there will be a size, or there could potentially be a sizable reduction and the maximum amount of forgiveness that you are eligible to receive.
Okay.
So if you have questions about it, I recommend they reach out to me, call me. We can talk through it. It's a little bit sticky. There's a lot of computations. There's a lot of what ifs. But I have been really hanging my hat on that safe harbor June 30th comparison to February 15th that was in the original law. That's where I've been hanging my hat.
All right. Another thing I'm seeing come up here is, and I think this could apply to a few different business categories. One example is an auto dealership, separate businesses, but the majority owner is all the same. But all the PPP loans were below $2 million for each business. Same thing if someone is asking affiliates if they have franchise codes. So multiple businesses, all under one common owner, where each individual business was below the 2 million threshold.
So there's two questions there. The one, let's just say I have, I don't know, a pool business. Let's say I have 5 pool cleaning businesses, and they each get $1 million loan from the PPP program. Combined, they're $5 million. Under that situation, and I own all of them, under that situation, I am going to clear that $2 million threshold, and I will fall under an audit with the SBA before they grant forgiveness. On the dealership one, dealerships, franchise restaurants, and hotels have a little bit of a nuance here in that they were really waived from the affiliate rules. Not to bore anybody on the call, but there's some debate now as to whether this affiliate rule is waived for the $2 million threshold because it was waived for the 500 employees and above requirement, right? So was the affiliate rule only waived for that 500 employees and more equivalent, or was it waived for everything? If I had multiple dealerships and I had total loans exceeding $2 million, I would probably go through this documentation exercise and just assume I'm going to get audited.
Sure. Okay. I would like to get to all these questions, folks, but I don't think we're going to have time. So we'll wrap it up with one other common one that I've seen repeated here several times. 1099 employees, consultants, and contractors. How do they fit into this?
So 1099s, self-employed, sole proprietors, they were able to apply on their own and receive their own loans. Those loans were based upon 2.5 months of their Schedule C earnings. So presumably there are not too many 1099s that would get $2 million loan from their 2.5 month worth of Schedule C earnings. To the extent that you have workers that you use that are 1099, they are ineligible for payroll cost purposes. The payroll costs that were defined under this forgiveness are really for W-2 wage earners. As I mentioned, 1099s, sole proprietors, self-employed, those were able to apply for their own loan, and they actually have their own interim final guidance that was issued immediately preceding, I think it was April 12th. 1099s were able to apply. I think the guidance came out that day or the day before. I would recommend that if they are themselves at 1099 to look at that guidance. But if you are a company that is trying to be forgiven for money is paid to 1099s, I would say that you're probably not going to be eligible for forgiveness for those expenses.
Okay. I know there are a lot more questions here. I would encourage folks to reach out to Stuart if they have more questions along these lines. You're also, of course, always welcome to reach out to the chamber. We'll post a recording of this after the fact, as we do with all of these, in case someone wasn't able to be here. Thank you guys both so much. This has been really, really valuable information, I think.
Thank you for hosting.
Absolutely. Great job, Stuart. Thanks.
Thank you.